Hello, everyone, and welcome to Enhancing Transparency, leveraging Zoom granular scopes for user data control. My name is Hughes, and I will be your speaker today. I've been with Zoom for around 4 years, and I am currently a senior technical sales architect that specializes in Zoom developer platform. Before we get started, quick statement. As we review this presentation, please know that the statements and information provided are to outline general product direction and should not be relied upon in making a purchasing decision. Nothing said in this presentation represents a commitment or legal obligation to deliver any material, code, or functionality. We have an action-packed agenda today. It is very exciting, right? First up, we're going to talk about two very exciting new features, granular and optional scopes. Wow. We're going to explore the mystery of what a granular scope is and what it's made of. We'll learn what they are and how we build with them. And finally, we're going to learn why use a basic authorization query when we can use an advanced authorization query. And we'll cover optional scopes and using them. And we'll learn how to provide delightful experiences with those optional scopes. So just a great time here. Thanks for joining us. Let's jump right into it. Why are we doing this, right? What is a granular scope? Access scopes today at Zoom are relatively broad, right? When we're talking about classic scopes. And they don't provide enough granularity for developers to build apps that practice the principle of least privilege. So this lack of granularity in scopes is hurting customers from adopting a lot of apps in the Zoom marketplace. You may have met a customer that has very strict privacy and security requirements for third-party integrations. And if you've ever run up against a customer like that, Granular Scopes is here to help developers ease the tension in that type of situation with those security-conscious customers. Put it simply, granular scopes break down the classic Zoom access scopes into smaller, more specific scopes that associate to limited API endpoints or events. And they're defined in the following format. They have a service, an action, a data claim, and an access. And we're going to dissect what each 4 of these items are that make up the granular scope definitions. First up, we have the service. This is the type of service that we're giving permission to, right? So a great example for this is meeting, webinar, team chat, phone, Zoom contact center, right? Any of the other various Zoom platform products. Next up, we have the action. And this is what the party is being granted permission for. And today, we only have 2 actions, right? It's read and write. But with granular scopes, we now have 4 available to us. We have read, write, update, and delete. So you'll see one of those 4 as the action in a granular scope. Next, we have the data claim. This describes the general data that we're looking for and that we are trying to access. So for example, if we had a meeting read participants, the data claim there is participants, and we would expect it to grant us the ability to read meeting participants, right? Same thing for if we had phone read participant, right? We would indicate that that phone data, participant data is governed by that scope. And then finally, we have access. And this is the level of access that applies to the scope that the developer is requesting. There are 3 values that are possible for access. The first one, and the most common one that we'll see, is null, just an empty value. That is a user level claim. The other 2 we'll see are admin and master. Admin is that account level claim, and master is for a master account using the master APIs. When we put it all together, we get the new definition of a granular scope: service, action, data claim, and access. So granular scopes are displayed and operate the same way as our classic scopes do today. You may be using granular scopes and not even know it, honestly. The build flow with granular scopes is exactly the same experience that you would see with classic scopes. On the lower left-hand corner of this slide, we can see what the previous experience looked like. And then on the right-hand side, we can see what the new experience looks like. And they are very, very similar. We moved the search bar a little bit and we updated some of the colors, but for the most part, the two are functionally the exact same. We can sort and view scopes by product and then select them from the right-hand side by clicking the checkboxes. One important thing to note is that classic scopes and granular scopes do not exist in the same app. If an app is using classic scopes, it will not see granular scopes. Vice versa, if an app is using granular scopes, it will not see classic scopes. There's no way to change that. All apps created before March 29th are using classic scopes. Any app created after that date, any app created after March 29th is using granular scopes. And once again, existing apps on classic scopes will continue to use classic scopes, and apps that are using classic scopes will not see optional scopes. Right? So if you're looking for optional scopes in an app that you may have previously created, you won't find it there if it is on classic scopes. So what are optional scopes? This is an extremely exciting developer feature coming to the platform, and it is available now for everyone to see, use, and develop with. This is a mechanism provided to developers to let them define a specific set of scopes that they need from a user at the time that they need them. So really enhancing the user experience. And the idea of one app to build them all, starts to come into play here. Today, if you're building apps on the Zoom platform, you may have an app for phone. You may have an app for meetings. You may have an app for webinar. And that's because if you run into a customer that doesn't have one of those product features, they can't authorize your app, right? Now you'll have the ability to set a lot of scopes to optional and then allow the customer to add one app instead of multiple for your product. Right, so now the best practice that we're recommending when you're adding scopes is to add the absolute minimum amount of scopes you need as required scopes to set the boundaries for the app. Use optional scopes wherever possible, and request access from users when needed. The user experience remains largely the same. As a developer, when I'm requesting access, I can choose whether or not these optional permissions are checked or unchecked when I present this permissions prompt to the user. And by default, all of the required permissions will be checked and the optional permissions will be unchecked. And the user will have the option to go in and check those additional permissions if they would like them. There is also a way for a developer to force optional permissions as required in subsequent authorization requests. So let's say you have a user that's trying to use a phone feature in your app, and they must authorize a scope. You can require that scope for them to continue in your application workflow. So let's take a look at an example. Consider an example app that requires the following scopes. We have meeting read participants, meeting read meeting, meeting read call, and meeting read voicemail. So this is an app that services two products of the Zoom platform. Optional scopes will allow the developer to ask for the scopes only when they need them, right? So my product is going to require the meeting scopes be mandatory for everyone. But later on, if my customer wants to add in phone functionality, right, I can request that scope at a later time, right? So I'm going to mark that as optional. Let's look at how we generate these access tokens. So the basic authorization query today remains the same, right? We're making no changes to how we request the response type or provide an authorization code to request a client credential granted. With the advanced authorization query, we add a couple of additional parameters to the token request. And you'll see new query parameters that are included in this request are the include granted scopes and the optional scopes parameters that we can add. And more information about these advanced authorization queries is available on the Zoom developer documentation today. And now we're going to jump into a demo of what it looks like to use some of these exciting new features. Now we're going to take a look at what it's like to put granular scopes into practice. So here I am at the Zoom developer documentation site, and I'm going to take a quick look at two API endpoints. The first one we're going to look at is list users. And we can see at the top of this endpoint, we have the classic scope definitions available. And then right underneath it, we have the granular scope definition. The next endpoint we're going to look at is list meetings. And same thing here, right? We have the classic scope definitions and then the granular scope definitions. Over here in the app marketplace, here I have a server-to-server OAuth app. This one is configured on classic scopes. So we see the same kind of familiar scope selection screen that we're all used to. And if I press the add scopes button here and click through the list here, you can see that all of these are still classic scopes, right? So this is an app that has been created before March 29th, and it is remaining on classic scopes. So I have this app here, and it has the two endpoints that we were talking about earlier, right? It's got those scopes all set in that app. The next app I have is the same server-to-server OAuth app, but on granular scopes, right? And you can see the scope screen here looks a little bit updated and a little bit different, right? One thing that is immediately apparent is that there's a new scope description dialog box down here where we can enter details about why we're requesting scopes from a user. The other thing, when we press the add scopes, we get a different kind of selection menu here that's separated into categories. So now, instead of just a standard list of all the scopes that I scroll through, I can come in here and select what I want. Also, if I start typing like list user into this search box at the top, it will filter all these categories for me to make finding the scopes I need a little bit easier. So you can see I've configured this one with those same two scopes for our endpoints, right? So we needed list users admin, and we needed meeting read list meetings admin. And yep, got both of those. Okay, so let's jump over to Postman and see what this looks like. So this is the classic server-to-server OAuth app, and I'm going to go ahead and request a token here. And we can see I get one back, no problem. And the scopes it returned exactly what we expected, right? We see those classic scopes returned with this token. So all set. Now, let's jump over to our granular server-to-server OAuth app and do the same thing. Same app, same scopes, different scope parameter, right? We can see this one is definitely using granular scopes. And we can see that it is returning the correct scopes, but they are definitely different, right? When I go between the two, you can see the difference. This is classic scopes.
This is granular scopes. And if you can imagine, when we look at these scopes, right, before, if I go to the documentation, user read basically gave me access to every single thing under this users category that has a get next to it. Now with the granular scope, list users admin, I only have access to this endpoint. And then, same thing on the meeting side here. I could use all of these meeting endpoints that had a get next to them before. And now I can only use this list meetings endpoint. So you can see that's what granular scopes is all about, limiting access where required and wherever possible. So great, that's working as expected, right? So then the next thing we should talk about is, what is this optional tab and what does it mean? So here I have a general app. This is an admin managed app. It's set up for just basic OAuth. And I'm here on the scopes tab, and I've done the same thing here for our 2 endpoints. I've selected them, by going through here and clicking the checkbox next to them. And now I've selected the meeting read list meetings admin as optional, right? I tick the box. If I hover over this little I here and I click on learn more, this will actually take me out to the marketplace developer documentation on basic and advanced authorization queries. So this is where we can find out how these things have changed and what it's going to take as a developer to modify the user experience. So let's look at this. All right. So I'm going to jump over to Postman here and we'll walk through what the user experience is. So we're going to do the basic authorization request first and just get an access token. And we can see our authorization screen here is exactly what we would expect, right? Our non-optional scopes, the mandatory one for viewing users, that is checked. And then we see we have an optional permissions for viewing a user's meetings. And as the user, I could tick or not tick this box. For this demo, I'm going to leave it unticked. Okay. And then we're going to just go ahead and allow this app. Now it's going to jump back into Postman and I'm going to hit proceed. And what I want to show you guys here is our scope parameter is just the required scope. So I did not get the user's permission for the list meeting scope. So it does not appear in this list. That's very important to note. Now, let's say later on in my application, I really do need list meetings. So let's see what that flow looks like. So now I'm using that advanced authorization query and I'm asking this user, hey, you must approve this scope now. It's no longer optional, right? I'm requiring you to approve this. So I'm going to go ahead and click allow. And then when I hit proceed, and now I can see here in my scopes parameter that I have both scopes approved by this user for this token, which is what I would expect. So we can see that's how we can use advanced authorization queries. Awesome. Hope everybody found this demo super informative. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed that demo. There was a little bit of discussion going on in the chat that I would like to bring to light now. Julia asked if an app was created before March 24th that's on classic scopes, is there a way to migrate it to granular scopes? The answer to that question is no. Today, there is not a way to migrate that app from classic to granular scopes. However, at a future date, we will be releasing the feature to migrate your app from classic to granular scopes. So stay tuned and look at that developer changelog to find out when that feature is going to become available. Another question we had from Adam was just generally, how do we think about classic scopes as we look across other products and platforms? Classic scopes were extremely broad in what they would authorize. As a developer, you would have access to hundreds of endpoints and data claims for every scope you requested. With granular scopes, that's no longer the case, right? We get down to very specific data claims and endpoints that we are accessing with each scope. Another thing to mention, just as we're talking about these changes to authorization on the Zoom platform in general, is this is the first step in really modernizing our authorization framework. So you'll see incremental changes now to how we provide security, authorization, and everything else to developers and users on the platform going forward. Granular Scopes is the first step, and it's a very exciting one. I am going to watch the chat and the Q&A here just for a couple more minutes and see if there's any more questions, concerns, or comments. But I do want to thank everyone for attending. We really appreciate it. We're going to give it one more minute in case people are still typing their questions into the chat. After this minute's up, I'm going to go ahead and close down the session. Again, thank you so much for attending. Appreciate your attendance. Okay, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. If you do have questions and you don't feel comfortable answering or asking them here, please reach out. will.hughes@zoom.us. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful developer summit.